we go. So this is what my sort of toy universe looks like at the moment. And you can see here I've got the Earth, and it's actually the Earth. We've been launching from Australia, from Woomera. So this is a what if Australia had a space program. And you can see here that we've got a whole bunch of satellites and stuff in orbit. Some of this stuff, the stuff where you can see like these little blue dots going around and everything, those are actually contracts which I can pick up if I want to pop things into contracts. And if we scroll out, we can see this great big sort of green contract there. I'm pretty sure, actually I'm not exactly sure, but I believe that's probably like a geostationary contract. There's lots and lots of small ones in here as well. But I've already got 4 successful launches so far, 54 days into my space program. The very, very first one is just called the Bug, so I'll just show you what this looks like. I'll just switch to it. The bug was really, can we get something into orbit? And if we wait for this to load, here we go, we have some sound. And you can see here, it's just this tiny, tiny little thing. It's a little bit hard to see, there we go. It's got this like round bit on the top, that's our probe core. It's got a couple of these antennae which come out from the back of that. And then this here is a fuel tank, and we've got a little engine at the end. I can show you what this looks like later on in terms of what launched it. But this was our very, very first successful launch. I've got an image album up online if you want to see what was involved with launching these. It being Kerbal Space Program, there's been hilarious accidents and so on and so forth. But this doesn't actually do anything except sit in space and beep. Except that it also acts as a communications relay, a very, very sort of low range one. So we can see here, I've got it in an orbit, and these red dots here are ground stations, and you can see it's connected to a number of ground stations. But also out here, it's connected to my science probe. My science probe is called Sagan, because Carl Sagan is absolutely amazing. And you can see that is connected to something else over the horizon. So we have been slowly putting together a communications network here. The other thing is using MechJeb. MechJeb gives me all sorts of useful things here. So we can see, what our orbital parameters are. We've got a fairly, what's called an eccentric orbit, because our closest approach to the Earth is around about, 300 kilometers, and our furthest away is about 750 kilometers. So it's this sort of elliptical orbit which we've got. The other thing about playing with a realistic game is that certainly the early engines are not restartable. So nor are they throttleable. You can't throttle things back. You can't restart them once they go out. So really, you want to get something up as high as possible. You're not going to have a good chance to circularize it. And that's something I'm going to be looking at today. How can I have a better system of being able to put things into nice round orbits? So let's look at the other things which we've got here. So I've got a let's look at Uhura. So Uhura, if I switch to Uhura, Uhura was a dedicated communications satellite. And it's in what's called a Molniya orbit. Now, my Russian is terrible, but this is a style of orbit that was invented by the Russians. And you can see here what it looks like. It's not facing the sun right now. That's this little solar panel, which is supposed to face the sun. But you can see here it's got looks like a communication satellite. It's got a whole bunch of these antennae. And that's because I'm playing not only just a realistic game, but I'm also using this route range model for antennae. So that means that if you have more of them, you can reach further. You can get your signals further and everything. So this isn't just for show. Those extra antennae are actually useful. There's also a little bit of redundancy there in case they break off. And if I was playing with something like Dang It, which allows parts to fail, if one of those antennae failed, then I would be okay with those backup ones. I don't think, last I checked, Dang It doesn't actually have failing antennae, but it'll be a cool thing to have. you can see here it's got these tiny little manoeuvring thrusters on the side. We've got a tiny little bit of monopropellant as well we could use to manoeuvre it. And on the back here, we have a whole bunch of these. These are just a whole bunch of RP engines. The RP was one of the initial rocket launchers. I don't know if Nathan Keller's watching this or not, but I'm sure that he would tell me exactly which rocket launchers it was. I suspect the RP was the very first ones. And I just built a cluster engine out of them. The idea of doing this is actually so that the first launches which we did with this, we wanted to put this into a very specific orbit, and I'll actually show you the orbit now. But what that required is being able to vary the amount of thrust and restart the amount of thrust which I've got. Now, with non-restartable engines, that's not possible, but by having a cluster of engines, I could choose to fire 4 engines at once or 2 engines at once, and decide on the amount of thrust which I needed that way. So, why is this in a very special orbit? Well, you'll see here, if you look at the Earth, here we've got a relatively small periapsis, so it's when it's close to the Earth, and a very long far-out apoapsis where it's far away from the Earth. And that's quite intentional, and you'll notice that's on an axial tilt as well. Now, part of that tilt is because I've been launching from Australia, and so you're always going to have an inclined orbit. If you're 30 degrees from the equator, you're going to have a 30-degree inclination on your orbit. But the main reason why I want that is so that this hangs over the southern skies for longer. And so if this spends a lot of time out here on this part of the orbit, that means that it's going to spend a lot of time with coverage over Australia, which is what I want. It's a communications satellite. What do I want communications for Australia? That's where we're launching from. And a relatively short amount of time on the other side of the world over here. So it's a pretty cool system of being able to do this. And these were originally set up by the Russians, because Russia is, this very high latitude, and they would launch into these Molniya orbits. And I think they had 3 of them in a synchronous orbit, so there'd always be one, very often 2 of these satellites in the sky at once. So this has been absolutely fantastic as a communications satellite, because when it's over the horizon, that's when we do all of our launches. We know that we're going to have communications back to our space center, back to Woomera, even if our launching craft goes over the horizon. Other stuff that we've got floating around, if I look, we're all completely unmanned at this stage. There's no actual manned things going on. I've got a dedicated science satellite, which is called Sagan, and we'll switch to Sagan. Just wait for this to go. My phone has been buzzing, which might mean that people have been tweeting at me. Oh, awesome. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mick Jones. And, Mick Jones apparently is having to freak out, but that's cool. You can watch the replay. So, this here is actually a dedicated, we're on the dark side over here. We might just time warp up till we go over to a brighter part of things. So we're just warping up time until we get to the other side of the Earth. One thing that's worth doing is putting lights on your spacecraft. It's absolutely beautiful. That's planet shine effects there of going over the horizon and getting that beautiful effect. So this here is our communications and science satellite. You can see here we've got like an itty-bitty solar cell. We've got a big communications array, so it's doing that as well. But it's also got, and down here we've got our engine and our thrusters. But what we've also got are these bays. Now this here is using the universal storage system, which gives you these beautiful bays with these wedges, and you can actually, if you're using Kerbal attachment system as well, you can actually get your Kerbinauts up and you can remove these wedges and you can replace them, and they're super cool. So what I'm going to do here, toggle goo bay doors, I'm actually going to undo this, and you'll see that the whole thing folds out and so you can actually go in there and access them. So one of these experiments is called Mystery Goo in like the default game. In RP-0, that's essentially basic biological experiments. Things like, can fruit flies survive space? No, they can't. Can water bears survive space? Hell yes, they can. So this here is your Mystery Goo experiment, and you can see I've just opened up the bay doors so you can see them. But there's some really cool stuff on here. One of them, let's see. Oops. No, not the fuel tank. That's the Science Junior. This is the materials experiment. That's the equivalent of the Russian, what was it called? The block. Oops. There we go. Just change our orientation a bit so it's easy to see. There was the block something, or the block C. Again, Nathan will be able to tell you this. Just a whole bunch of materials experiment. This is super, super heavy. But again, that was put up into space to see how materials work in vacuum. And you can see that the animations there are absolutely gorgeous. But the one which I love the most, and I'll zoom out a bit so you can see this, is magnets. And you can see over here, these are some of the actions which I've got set. This is using Desario's Action Groups Extended. It is the best mod ever. And so I can toggle magnet, and you can see here, I get this enormous boom that comes out the side. That is a big magnetic boom. It's a magnometer boom, and so what that can do is it can actually map the magnetic field, and you can actually do that. You can see here, toggle magnometer, log magnometric data, display all hotspots, so on and so forth. All of these will actually feed data into ScanSat. If I pop up a small map here, which you can't see very much of, but if I was doing planetary mapping, which is my next goal, you can actually get a whole bunch of stuff on there in terms of resources and everything. So that's pretty useful in terms of doing interplanetary missions when we're going to be looking for resources later on. I'm going to pull that back in. In an ideal world, I would have used all of these for toggling bay doors and everything, and the greens and reds would indicate what was in use and what was not. So that's my science satellite, which I managed to launch. It was very hard to launch. Oh, and the other thing I should note with this, why are you... Yeah, thank you. The last thing I should note here, there's 4 bays, and you might wonder, well, what's in that last bay? What's in this bay over here? And if you look at what's in that bay over there, part of it is HTP, which is high test peroxide, which we're using as a monopropellant. But you'll see the other thing which it's got is lead. There's 15 litres worth of solid lead in here. The reason for that is this materials experiment is so heavy, I needed to have a counterweight on the other side. And without the counterweight, we had all these problems with launching. It would tip over, so on and so forth. Would have real problems controlling the craft. So we have a counterweight there, which is really, I don't want to put counterweights on things because it's very, very wasteful. It's very expensive to launch anything into space. But the amount of effort that was required, and certainly the expense required to build the infrastructure without that was very hard. So that's why we've got that there. Let's see if I can grab another craft. And we can look at IREC. So I've kept this tradition that NASA also has, that you only name your crafts once you've actually got them up, and the mission is successful, because nobody wants to say, oh, I've got this particular spacecraft and it breaks, and think about the Hubble Space Telescope. If there was an accident launching that, we could go, oh dear, we can't use the word Hubble anymore, and it absolutely ruins the name. So this is IREC. This is my last thing which I've got in orbit. You can see here, you're probably familiar with the communications arrays. That's this big spiky thing at the top here. This is a restartable engine. Absolutely amazing. It's got 0 ignitions left, but we managed to have an engine that we could restart. The downside is it's a very, very how do I put this? It's a very powerful engine if you've got a small probe. And also, next generation technology, we have trackable solar cells as well, so these actually track the sun. these things around here, these are little solid boosters. And the reason we have those solid boosters is twofold. First of all, because we can use them to make small maneuvers without needing to start that main engine. But secondly, we use them as ullage motors. And as ullage motors, what's an ullage motor? Well, if you're in space and you have liquid fuels in your fuel tank, they're just all going to like float around and everything. And to get good fuel flow, you actually need them all down the base of your spacecraft near the engine. And so once your engine's lit, that's not a problem, because inertia is going to push them back towards the engine. But before they're lit, there's this question of how do you get them back towards the engine end? And so what you do is you have ullage motors, which are your smaller motors, your smaller engines, which push the whole thing forward, push your propellant back via inertia, and therefore you can then start your main engines. So these here essentially are used to be able to do ullage maneuvers, as well as being able to do small maneuvers. And you can see here I've actually got them set up on my action groups and everything, so I can fire each of these fires a pair of them. So I've got 4 of them which are burnt out at the moment. There's 4 left, however, which are still fresh. So if I needed to, I could actually use that to perform additional maneuvers, which I don't want to at this time. But yeah, that's pretty cool. This here, as a satellite is concerned, it's launched, or been launched, mostly as a mapping satellite, as a surveying satellite. And I can grab this here, although actually I can undo this from here. Mapping. So you see this, I apologize, it's on the dark side of the spacecraft. But you can see I've got this awesome antenna which is just extended. That's part of ScanSat. You can see it there. And thank you, whoever's messaging me in another window. You're live. So that there is a radar altimeter. So what it does is it bounces radar towards the ground, looks for it to come back, and it can tell the distance to the ground from that. And if everything was going well, that would show up, of course, on my my little ScanSat map. And here we've got our IREC surveyor and everything, but you'll notice we're not seeing anything. And the reason for that is because this was launched too high. I put this in too high in orbit. One of my goals with this craft was to be able to use it for communications, because it was vital that we set up a communications network, and consequently it's too far from the Earth for that actually to be useful, despite the fact that it looks like we're reasonably close to the Earth there. We can't actually use this to do any sort of useful mapping. We got a little bit of map data when we were launching it and doing our insertion burn, but otherwise, unfortunately, not. So its mapping functions, unfortunately, are not being used. But it works great as a communication satellite. It's actually in this nice high orbit. And one of the things which it does have, if I pop over to the other side here and I start this up, it has long-range comms. And so this here folds out, and you can see that's a little dish antenna. And so what that lets me do is I can point that at something. I can actually choose to retarget that, so I can point that at one of the other planets and everything, and I can get long-range comms out there, because the little sort of stick antennae which I've got, these omni antennae which I've got at the top there, they're great for communications around the Earth. They're not great for long-range communications. So that's going to be used in a future mission, possibly if we're going to the moon to provide a little bit of extra coverage there, definitely if we're sending probes to other planets. And one of the things which is really interesting is that you can, with the technology required to get something to the moon, you can quite happily get something to Venus or to Mars, possibly to sort of other planets as well. The delta V requirements there, the amount of energy which you need, is around about the same. And so really, we can be probing all these other things, which would be really, really cool. So that's IREC. Those of you who have read his Dark Materials might be familiar with the name there. And what have I shown you? I've shown you all the satellites we have. So that's everything which we have in orbit right now. IREC, you'll note, is in this polar orbit because it was supposed to be mapping, and due to that, oops, it is too high. But we want to pop another thing into polar orbit now that we've learnt not to put things up too high. So let's go look at that. Let's hop over to the Space Center and wait while this loads. And I may, once I show you this, I may stop this recording so we have a nice recording of Heroes Paul's game in space. And then I might also tweak some of my video settings as well to see if we can get some more consistent streaming output for everyone. Okay, so here we are in our Space Center building things, and we should be able to load up. See if I can remember the one that I'm working on. Science re-entry. Comms. Surveyor 2, yes. So Surveyor 1 was the IREC design, which worked, but you only had a limited number of restarts, 5 restarts on that engine, and you had to do ullage calculations as well. So the idea of this craft here, which if I zoom out, you can see that we've got, this is almost like a big sort of bottle rocket, and we've got a cutaway section here for that top fairing. So that's what it would look like if you're launching it, just a great big sort of stick. And here's what's actually inside. This is your sort of main lift section to get it off the ground. This here, I've gone through so many iterations of this. This is designed to actually get it into orbit, and it's using that same RD-58 engine, which I showed you before on the original IREC probe. And to begin with, this was a relatively small tank, and it was a much lower thrust engine. And the idea was that, yep, this will get us into orbit, and then we use what we've got up here, and I'll just pull away these fairings. What we've got up here is the actual probe itself. And the probe itself has this little cluster of engines down here. Now these are sort of 1 kilonewton thrusters. And the important thing here is that they run off a reaction control system model. So rather than having a limited number of restarts, I can restart these as many times as I want. And they're using the same aerosine fuel and high-test peroxide. Oh no, sorry, they're using aerosine and NTO. Up here as our little manoeuvring thrusters as well. So the idea is that we can fire these, and they don't provide very much thrust. The amount of thrust they provide is really quite paltry. But the important thing is that we can use them as often as we want, which means that what I can do is I can take this, pop it into a low orbit, do all of the mapping and everything, and then maneuver it into other orbits as required. Also, because these sort of orbital maneuvering engines would be really useful to have, this is a test run for that. On the top here, we have a bunch of stuff. I don't know why this keeps on having a problem here. It detaches. This here is a service cargo bay, and I've actually got stuff inside there. If we zoom in, you can see I've got a little radiation sensor there. There's a little temperature sensor. So this is just a little science ring. There's a pressure sensor in there, which is what that is over there. So it's a little science ring you can put things into because it keeps it clean. But for some reason, this part here, see, if I reconnect it, it looks fine. But after loading it, it doesn't. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. At the top, we've got our comms array. This here is another magnometer. The idea is that the first magnometer we put up, we could power it for a little bit, but it takes a really long time for the solar cells to repower it there. This has much more. Warning, this thing opens. It does. This has much more advanced solar cells. I can't expand them here, but they're much larger. They go out, they track and everything. We've got a much bigger power budget with this particular craft. So you can see here I've got that's my radar altimeter on that side. That's also a long-range comms because it's super, super easy to pop up. These are big solar panel arrays on there.